Kamala Harris had an awkward hot mic moment Wednesday as she appeared to stumble through a live Zoom press conference on Hurricane Milton. Caught on video during the Zoom briefing, which featured President Joe Biden, DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, and 4 other officials, Harris covers her mouth in an apparent attempt to covertly communicate with her team. And come to find out, it looks like the VP staff was feeding her questions to ask before she covered her mouth and warned them it's a live broadcast.
The hot mic moment wasn't Harris's only faux pas this week. She dialed into the Weather Channel and tried to explain the difference between a Category 5 and 4 hurricane. Watch here.
The other point, Mike, that I would make, especially came through on the briefing from the federal experts, it's really important that we think about the language that we're using to talk about what we are predicting. Because, for example, it has moved from time to time from a Category 5 to a Category 4. It's important that we not emphasize that downgrading has happened because, in fact, the difference between Category 5 and Category 4 in terms of the danger and the damage is pretty much the same.
It's a good reminder that that mic is always hot, no matter the situation or circumstance. Obviously, it's not new to have principals, be fed notes, questions to ask. Same thing happened during all the previous administrations, presidents being handed cards to say something or to speak out about something. It's just I think probably the latest in a long lines of attacks on the vice president when it comes to these kinds of things.
I think you're right that obviously people get notes in advance and they get prepared questions that they're supposed to ask during these briefings from their staff. That's why you have a staff, is to help prepare you for these types of events. But I'm curious why they were talking to her during the broadcast. Like, that should be on your piece of paper.
I mean, that's like a staffing issue more than any. Like, the staff should know better.
Right.
Not to, it's a live feed. Not to be talking during it to her,
They should have known that. She should have muted her mic before saying, it's a live feed. Just not a good look. And then the Weather Channel interview I don't think was that bad, but it kind of reminded me of this the moment she had when she was explaining the Ukraine-Russia war. And she's like, well, Russia's a bigger country and it took over Ukraine, a smaller country, and that's bad. But like in isolation, none of these are terrible, but
Sure.
it is due to the fact that there seems to be this pattern of sort of Veep-like moments surrounding Kamala Harris and some of her word salads that she likes to throw out. It gives people a laugh.
Well, so I think I give her a lot of credit for going on those channels. I think it's important now. People are saying that, well, the vice president really doesn't have a role in this. And what I've been saying in response is she's now the de facto leader of the Democratic Party, right? It is important, for her to have that conversation with Ron DeSantis to show that this is a nonpartisan response to these horrific storms that have back-to-back devastated so many communities in the South. And I think it's important for her to be out there. She's not a meteorologist, to your point, in terms of not getting some of those facts correct on the ground. But I think it's critically important for there to be a united message and to push back on so much of the misinformation, disinformation that's been coming out in the last couple of weeks, ever since Helene hit, and then obviously into Milton.
I am kind of curious about what exactly her role is, because I can't find any evidence that she ever tried to call Ron DeSantis before during previous natural disasters in Florida. And so although she is, of course, the leader of the Democratic Party now, she is running for the presidency, we do still have a president who said that he talked to Governor DeSantis, that he thinks he's doing a great job. DeSantis, in turn, says that he's happy to take phone calls from the president. So at the same time that obviously the campaign wants to show she has some kind of executive experience.
100%.
Certainly they want to give the perception that she is a leader in some right. But if she hasn't really been there talking to these governors for the past 3.5 years, and she just kind of swoops in one of the biggest moments with so much devastation, wouldn't you feel as a governor that she was being politically opportunistic?
So again, and I go back to the idea that she is no longer kind of just the normal backseat vice president anymore. She is driving a lot of this administration response now because she is that nominee and the de facto leader of the party. And again, I think from a visual standpoint, it's obviously important from a campaign standpoint, right? As the only second woman to run, there's a lot of knocks about women in politics, that they're not strong enough. Obviously, running for an executive position, you want to be out there with that, that jacket with the seal on the ground, meeting with those folks. And she has done that in the past for other storms, but her role is obviously much more elevated given the fact that we're 4 weeks out from the election and she is the nominee.
Yeah, and I think her campaign really bungled this in the beginning with the response to Hurricane Helene, because if it is their goal to show that she's going to be this strong leader who's able to respond to these incidents, they should not have had her campaigning in Las Vegas until Sunday night, which was basically 2 full days after Hurricane Helene hit. And then she taped the Call Her Daddy interview in California on Monday morning before returning to the White House for an in-person briefing. At that point, Trump was already on the ground in Georgia. Biden actually made it back to the White House from his Rehoboth Beach vacation before Kamala Harris did. So from an optics standpoint, I mean, that was a huge error on that part, and definitely gave the impression to a lot of people on the ground that she didn't really care. She was just coming through for her photo op.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly going to be the Republican attack against her. And again, I think what you're seeing is an effort by this administration, especially elevating her, that trying to combat the issue of misinformation, disinformation out there. I thought it was interesting to see, this response from Chuck Edwards, a fairly new member of Congress, Republican from North Carolina, who had to come out publicly and debunk a number of these claims floated by his colleagues in the House, by the former president himself, in terms of issues of relief funds being diverted away from the response to migrants, which has been debunked up and down. You saw a really, I think, agitated, upset, angry commander-in-chief yesterday, taking on those lies, taking on what former President Trump has said in the wake of these horrific tragedies, trying to politicize those. And again, we'll see how those dynamics play out. I think the response is also going to be critically important over these next 4 weeks. I think the administration has been out in front, especially on Milton. But we've got 4 weeks to handle this, continue to hopefully handle this correctly, and that is not always the case. We've seen it with Sandy, right, with Chris Christie and the embrace of Obama and the political dynamics of that, with Charlie Crist in Florida with a hurricane response. So while there's incredible tragedy and suffering on the ground, there's also political ramifications for these responses.
Yeah, very true. And I was glad to see that J.D. Vance, who of course is Trump's running mate, clarified what is going on with FEMA and the Migrant Shelter Fund, which is that up until 2023, the funds did come from FEMA to shelter undocumented immigrants, or illegal aliens as I call them. And then in 2023 to 2024, fiscal year 2023, they created a new fund through CBP, which is then distributed through FEMA. And I think the argument or the criticism is some people have gotten this wrong because they've conflated it as FEMA's actually taking funds away from disaster relief, which is not true. But it's a case of mission creep, right? Like, is this really what FEMA should have its focus on when there are these natural disasters that are affecting so many Americans? But I mean, I guess it's an argument for a different day.
And it's super complicated, right?
Yeah.
It's pots of money, different agencies.
Right.
It's kind of in the woods on a lot of in the high grass and a lot of this kind of stuff. When Trump has a fairly effective argument to be made, if it's just the top line number.
Right, exactly. I mean, he can just say FEMA has mission creep. It's spending millions of dollars on this other charge, or billions of dollars on this other charge, when it should have a more narrow focus on disaster relief. And that's a perfectly effective political message.
And we'll see how it plays out.
We will.
These less than 4 weeks out.
More on Rising after this.